Hello, welcome to P's and G's Online Church. It's so good to see you, to have you with us today. My name is Laura. Today we're going to be praying together, we're going to be reading the Bible together, we're going to be having some worship together, and we're going to hear from Nate, who is our guest this week, Nate Johnson, and our co-host is Mark.
Yeah, so really good to be together. Let us know where you are coming from just now. Let us know where you are, what you're up to. We're just drinking coffee. For some of you, it might be the morning. For some of you, this might be late at night. For some of you, you might be on the train or the bus. So really good to be together. We're going to go into worship now, and we're using this song, The Lion and the Lamb. For some reason, this song has resonated globally for about 4 or 5 years. And I think there's something about it which is in this little bridge section that says, "Who can stop the Lord Almighty?" And it's been a big couple of weeks. We've had COP in our neighbouring city, greatest city in the world, Glasgow. And COP's been going on, a big part of maybe your life, a big part of others. But that line of who can stop the Lord Almighty is an encouragement to us that whatever is happening in our world, God has a plan, God has a purpose. And we're trusting Him to bring that out in the world. So let's worship just now.
Kings and kingdoms will bow down, and every chain will break as broken hearts declare His praise. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles, and every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sin of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before the gates, make way before the King of Kings. Our God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles, and every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sin of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before Him. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? 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 Who can stop the Lord? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power
So, Nate, you're a guest. Tell me, who are you?
I'm the youth worker at Peas and Cheese, and I'm married. I have to Valerie, and we have two kids, Theo and Ellen, and another
Yeah.
on the way in January because we weren't busy enough.
No.
Our lives weren't chaotic enough with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. We thought we'd bring one more in.
Yeah.
And on a daily basis, I'm doing youth work here in the city and also help out with various things around the church.
Nice. And do you have a favourite child?
They're all my favorite. But it's funny when you have kids. When you have one, you can hardly imagine loving another child the same way.
Yeah.
Then you have the second one, of course, you love them, and then you think, oh, how are we going to find more room? But
Yeah.
Wow.
somehow you do find room.
That's amazing.
Nice. And you work for the church. So what does a day-to-day routine look like for you?
One of the beauties of the work that I have is that not every, I may have sort of a weekly rhythm, but I don't have really a daily rhythm. So, we come in, we have our stand-up, we do stuff. Sometimes I'm meeting people on one-on-one. Sometimes I'm doing some reading, some study. Sometimes I'm doing admin. Sometimes I'm going down to certain parts of the city and volunteering, playing football, things like that. So I do a variety of things, and that's one of the blessings of the job.
Nice. And I'm guessing because you work at church, you believe in Jesus?
I am a paid-up Christian, that's true.
Newsflash. So how does your faith impact your day-to-day life then?
Well, it'd be very difficult to do my job if I didn't actually believe in
Gives
Jesus.
you a job. Yeah.
One of the reasons I ended up becoming a minister or a youth worker is because I had tons of questions about my faith. I'd grown up in a Christian home, and I wondered, what is this? So I started unpacking it, started studying it, and after a while, I had several theology degrees and philosophy degrees, and I thought maybe and it seemed like ministry is a natural place to go. But I would say that questioning my faith and was a huge part of me becoming a minister, actually.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Nice. So we're going to hear it from you a little bit later
Yep.
on the passage we're going to be reading.
Yeah.
And just now, we're going to take a bit of time and pray. So, as Nate was saying, faith is a big part of day-to-day life and informs a lot of the things that you do. So one of the amazing things Nate does is his journey with young people, is help people unpack the life in Christ that they have. And we are privileged in Edinburgh where we are that our faith can be public, like what we're doing just now. We can create this in Edinburgh and we can put it out online. That is a privilege. And today's Remembrance Day. And so, a crucial time where we are reflecting on what is freedom and what was the cost of freedom for many of us. And so we want to join with lots of people around the UK and many other nations to reflect on that. We have a 2-minute silence, and this might actually be that you're in another nation, but you think, again, what does freedom look like in your nation, and who paid for that? So we're going to take 2 minutes now and do something that isn't usual for online, which is have silence. So over the next couple of minutes, we want to invite God to bring to our minds, where did freedom come from? It might be that you have family members or friends or folks in the past that were part of serving in armed forces or serving communities at pivotal moments of conflict. And so for 2 minutes, let's take time and reflect on that. Invite God to speak to you and think about those that have mattered to you.
So today we're going to get stuck into Colossians 3. Nate is going to pull out some of the key themes for us. But first I'll just read it for you. It's verses 22 to chapter 4, verse 1. And I'm reading from the New International Version. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favour, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there is no favoritism. Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven.
So, last week we had a strong and challenging passage.
Yeah.
This week we have a strong and challenging passage. My head is already pinging with questions, thoughts, and struggle, and I am grateful that you're here. As you quietly mentioned, you have studied the scripture quite deeply. I found it both like a relief and I'm looking forward to the conversation now, because this is a really challenging passage. And one of the first challenges can be that we sit here in 2021 and we look back the way to first century Mediterranean culture, and we load it up with our lens and with our assumptions about this person, Paul, and what they were getting at. And so hopefully what we can do is try as best we can to go back into that context, put on the lenses of how they may have been looking at the world and experiencing the world, and then understand that forward. So, if we were in that place, what would a conversation about slavery be with Paul, who was the writer of this? Because this sounds really challenging, it sounds a little wild. But what are some of the things going on?
Yeah, well, I do want to comment on that. We're living in a world where we believe in a God who's radically committed to love and justice. And so at the shoot, we believe God is radically committed to love and justice. Yeah. And at P's and G's, we're radically committed to this God who loves justice. And we rightly recoil at whoa, slaves, obey your masters. This stuff jars us, and it should. We live after 400 years of, the transatlantic slave trade, and then these led to sort of theories of racial superiority, and we're still living with some of the consequences today. So we don't want to gloss over that in these discussions at all. But I think, of course, we, like you said, we can't import that as much as we recoil at that, we can't import that on the ancient system of slavery. There was Assyrian, Babylonian, Egyptian, Roman, Greek cultures who practiced slavery in different ways, and in the Mediterranean world, there's often a hybrid. And it was a world that had endemic corruption. It was super hierarchical. You were at the whims of various magistrates who might or might not enforce laws. There was deep, deep poverty. So when we go back in this culture, we need to be careful not to ask Paul to give what I would say is a Twitter answer to a real world problem, right? A Twitter solution to just some really serious stuff going on, because it wasn't just as if slavery was an isolated injustice. There was pretty rampant inequality, injustice, poverty across the board in the ancient world.
Okay. So we're looking at a society that makes, Game of Thrones look civilized and decent. The medieval look like they'd nailed it. Yeah, okay. And that insight that we have a risk of trying to make Twitter solutions to real world problems, I think there's a book there, and there's a whole kind of solution to that. So part of what you help me unpack is, what is Paul's commitment here? What is he hoping by writing these phrases, these provocative statements of culture? Yeah,
well, so again, when we look at the context and what's happening, I think if we had a conversation with Paul about slavery, he'd be like, oh, it's horrific. He believed that every single human being was created in the image of God, and that God himself had come in the flesh and died for them, and then had invited them into his family. And he makes radical statements like there's neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, male nor female. They were all one in Christ. He says, it is for freedom Christ has set us free. He says, we are co-heirs with Christ. We're identified with Christ. He just obliterates all these sort of class, status, all kinds of hierarchies and how to put it, categories that we have as human beings. So he's blasting past all that stuff, and he says, you guys are all family. You guys are one. And he wants people to be reconciled. He wants people to be close. And he believes in the dignity and the infinite worth of every human individual. So Paul is radically committed to freedom and to liberty. But of course, he's living in a world that I mentioned before had deep injustice. And he's speaking to people who often had little or no power. And people would become slaves for a variety of reasons. They had sometimes been POWs, sometimes they'd been born into it, sometimes they were criminals, they'd been sentenced to it. Sometimes they had sold themselves to pay off debts. Sometimes, this is kind of, I read about this, there was a path to Roman citizenship. If you sold yourself to a certain kind of family, could somehow pay your way out, and then you'd become a Roman citizen, which had a lot of privileges. There were a lot of different things that could happen to you. So when Paul's addressing this, if you were in a well-off family, things might not be so bad. I mean, it wasn't great. Let's not, especially if you're a woman, it was terrible. But then if you got dumped out of a situation in which you were maybe with a middle class or wealthy family, you might get dumped into a situation of deep poverty, inequality, vulnerability that actually wasn't any better. So to ask again Paul to make some sort of radical statement, he's making a radical statement about who they are intrinsically, but he's not making some sort of quick solution politically, because he just lives in a world. It wasn't as if slavery was an isolated problem. I mean, there was inequality, injustice all across the board, and there was a variety of solutions that needed to be brought to bear. But anyway, so I think Paul is, he's a realist, and he's trying to help people cope in the midst of a very difficult situation. And actually, I think Paul is giving a theology of work there. Right. So he's trying to call people, he says, when you work is unto the Lord. He's saying, basically he's calling work an act of worship. And actually, I think he talks to slaves, and again, even talking to slaves in the midst of the church gave them a radical dignity that they were worth addressing and worth bringing into the conversation. But I think Paul uses this because it is unjust, and because it is unfair, and because it is difficult. Right. And if he can speak a theology, or if he can speak good news into their work situation, that can be good news for anybody's work situation.
Right.
I hear you talking about that, and I think you've talked about how actually normal slavery was back then. Like, it was in every kind of culture, area, whatever. I just find it kind of mad that Paul has such a different opinion on it all. How on earth did he come up with that opinion? I mean, God, I guess, but everyone is so set on this is how it works, this is how it runs, and they're shocked by what Paul is saying. Yet he's been able to come up with this from somewhere. I just find it kind of mad.
No, it is. I mean, it was his encounter with Jesus. I mean, and he believed from the Jewish scriptures that every human being was created in the image of God. But he also believed that God had sent his son to die on a cross, and every single person, slave, free, Jew, Gentile, was called into this family. I mean, it's really radical. Yeah. And arguably, it transformed the way all of Western civilization has worked. I mean, at this time, the estimates are from anywhere from 10% to 30%, sometimes in the major cities, were slaves. And again, and besides that, there's deep poverty. But Paul is speaking, and it was a very hierarchical society. And again, Paul's just pulling everybody onto a level where whether you're a master, you're going to be held accountable. And even if you're a slave, God can fill your work with dignity and meaning, and I'm watching you, and I will reward you. And when you come into my presence, I will offer you something that no one else can offer to you.
Right. And there was a really beautiful connection between Philemon, that there was a book of the Bible a letter written to Philemon by Paul, and Onesimus, who up until this moment I always called Onesimus. But that was a relationship change that really beds in the example of that lived out. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Paul's in conversation with a sort of, it's not completely clear whether he's an escaped slave or a slave who's actually come to Paul to sort of intervene in a difficult situation, whatever, but Paul writes. And it's interesting, if you compare that with some contemporary Roman literature, there's another with a guy named Pliny the Younger. He asks a slave owner to receive a slave back. He said, look, he's going to come, he's going to say he's sorry, and he reinforces the status quo. He's going to come back, say he's sorry, he's penitent, He's going to humble himself, and then you should just accept him back. Don't punish him too hard. Paul writes to Philemon, and he says, look, Onesimus is coming back to you, and I want you to receive him as a brother. I want you to receive him as a brother. And he says, I want you to let him come, and he needs to work with me. He's going to be a fellow worker. Interestingly, this character Onesimus shows up 8 verses later in Colossians, just from the passage we're looking at. And he says to the Colossians, to this church, he says, he is a faithful and beloved brother, and he's one of us. He identifies them. Again, how radical to think that everybody is just on equal footing and equally in the family. And again, some have made the case, a guy named Tom Holland in a book called Dominion has made the case that this sort of thinking was actually foundational to the human rights construct that we now live in the West. That we don't. It's not based on classical authors. It's actually based on Christian ideas from Jesus and Paul. That we have our whole system of human rights. That's worth exploring. I think there's a compelling case there. But yeah, people can just look that up and see what they think for themselves.
Yeah.
So obviously we don't have slaves anymore like that in the same way. As you said, like we believe in equality.
Yep.
So is this relevant today at all?
Well, I think it is. And I think this is exactly what Paul's getting at. I do want to make one last little point about this. That Paul isn't writing from an ivory tower. Paul isn't writing from a research university. Paul's actually in prison when he writes this. Paul has gone through kangaroo courts, trumped up charges. He's been persecuted. He's been tortured. He's been beaten. He has spent actually years in prison. He knows what systemic injustice and oppression looks like. And again, in this letter, he references that he's in prison. So Paul is well acquainted with the systemic injustice and oppression going on in that world and how multidimensional it was. And so he is in no way complicit with that. But what he wants to do is he wants to tell people that in the midst of the chaos of life, in the midst of the injustice, in the midst of the unfairness, we need to fix our eyes on Jesus. And again, either this is profoundly shallow and like horrible to tell people and cruel, right? Or this is like profoundly true, and that means that the God of the universe has filled your work, however menial or unimportant in the eyes of the world, with deep meaning. He says, whatever you do, you do it unto the Lord. He says, I think fundamentally Paul is saying all of our work is an act of worship.
So there's, right there's a change in relationships at work. And the idea, I think Paul, our friend Paul, rather than Apostle Paul, was quoting John Wimber saying that the church is the equipping place for the marketplace. I think we might understand that in terms of our mission, our purpose, our value, but really it's around our relationships. It's around how we treat one another and the conversations that we create and that we occur in our workplaces. So, how does this stuff start to impact us in working relationships?
Yeah, I think, again, in kind of the light of COP that's going on right now in Glasgow, I think Christians are in a really healthy way decompartmentalizing their faith. That there aren't like little bits and pieces of our faith that apply to maybe, my spiritual life, or when I go to church, or when I'm at work, or when I'm driving my car, or how I take out my rubbish, or how I consume energy. Like all these different things are actually a part of what it means to be a Christian. And so God is kind of calling us to live all of our lives in Him, including our work. And so when it's all an act of worship, then again, whatever we're doing, however menial or however important, it's for, to use a cliche, it's for an audience of one, which is sort of a cheesy Christian phrase, but there's still truth in it. You know what I mean? Cheesy cliches are used because there's some truth in them. But if it's worship, then, and it's for God, then however menial it may seem to us, or however unimportant in the eyes of the world, then we're called to do our best, because we're not doing it for one another or even for ourselves. He says, whatever you do, do it with all your heart. Like, pour yourself into this. And again, Paul at other places says, hey, if you can get free, get free. If you're in a bad work situation, it's unjust, it's unfair. Hey, yeah, move on, you know what I'm trying to say? But while you're doing what you're doing, whatever it is, peeling a potato or running a 100-meter dash, or the 400 meters, as, this comes from Chariots of Fire, whether it's peeling a potato or running a 400-meter dash, or 400 meters, do it all to the glory of God.
Peel your potatoes for Jesus.
Well, it's a line from Chariots of Fire.
You work in a workplace day to day with colleagues.
Yeah.
Is there any particular colleague you work with that you'd like to kind of imbue that kindness, that meaning on, particularly maybe the worship guy, or I don't know.
Well, my question is, if I give some shout outs, will there be some Soderbergh in return?
Yes.
Soderbergh.
Absolutely.
I want a peas and cheese bola.
Yes. So what I hear from you there, Nate, is you're going to buy me a bakery bun from our local bakery. So I'm enjoying where this is going.
Good, I love it.
So, Laura, you work in different corporate setting, engineering, and Nate and I can buy each other bakery all day. But what's some of this like for you when you think about workplace relationships and dynamics going on and pressure that you're in? How does this sit for you in these transformational workplace relationships?
Yeah, I mean, people I work with are still nice. They've bought me pastries before, which is actually pretty good. But I guess how does it impact me at work? Like you said, there's certain pressures, when it comes to deadlines, or when it comes to something's gone wrong and you're in a team, and actually, do you take the blame for your part? Do you stay humble, or do you point the finger and say, well, they didn't do this well, they didn't meet this deadline? Or how do you bring honesty and kindness, and how do you do your best rather than trying to cut corners? Or so I guess that's how I would do it at work.
Yeah, because there's that interesting thing of sometimes in the workplace we treat people based on titles. That's how we kind of defer ourselves, and we can kind of honour what someone's doing, but it can be that we treat them based on the title, up or down. And either way, we're in an up or down relationship with another human being.
Yep.
And it's like, well, how quickly could we not treat someone as the title, but we want to get back to the person and the soul, and treat someone as another human being, and imbue them with that love, that meaning that we have in relationship.
I think that's really interesting you put it that way. I mean, it's interesting, he uses slaves and masters in this category, and usually master has a lot of power, or a lord. Actually, the word lord is actually what it would be if you translate it, as we usually translate that phrase that word in the New Testament. The word is lord. So there are many lords, and there are also these servants, these slaves. And the slave has little power, the one has a lot of power. But of course, most of us are somewhere in between, right? We have a little bit of power, and there are people that we have sort of authority over, and people have authority over us. And we're navigating all these relationships. And basically, again, I feel like he's saying this is an act of worship. We need to orient ourselves to Jesus, to God, work for him, and then everything else everything will fall into place if we're working hard, we're doing our best, we're being faithful. And it's not up to us to kind of scramble or strive, put other people down or lift other people up. He says, I'm going to be the one who rewards you. And so, there are times when we can, be self-effacing or humble. I mean, there can be a time, I guess, to blow your own horn, or to, that's in job interviews, things like that, or bring something to people's attention. That's okay. That's part of the realities of work. But ultimately, there's this sense that our honor and opportunity and our success, whatever that means, comes from God first. And that we can trust him with that. And again, either that's cruel or that's profoundly true, that God is faithful, and even at work in these situations. I want to be careful that we don't just think of these as like random principles at work, that if we implement them, that there's a personal God who's dynamically involved in our work. And again, as pastors, there's something like, of course we have to pray and do stuff, though it can be easy to get mechanistic, or to use the tools that we have in terms of speaking, music, different things to try to get certain ends, to achieve our ends. But at some level, we have to always, all of us, whether you're a civil engineer, and I believe that's what you do, right? Sort of. Yeah. Okay. And, whatever it is, God can lead and guide and give you wisdom, insight in your relationships, your team, and even the sorts of things that you do. I just think God is at work in all those things. Yeah.
Well, I think a brilliant place to come and pray around that now, which we're going to do. So we've unpacked some real complex stuff there. So it might be you want to chat, let us know your thoughts, let us know any other scriptures that jump to mind that kind of help unpack that. But importantly now, we're going to take a moment and we're going to pray, we're going to reflect. really think about those workplaces that we're in, whatever your working situation is. It might be that it's in the home, it might be that it's in school, it might be in an office. It might be that you're navigating how to return to work and get through that process. But where's Christ in that situation with you? A real key thing I absolutely love was that work is an act of worship. And an act of worship can lead us into surprising places because it's where we bring the presence of God. It's where we recognize the presence of God. So for a moment now, we're going to take 90 seconds and just reflect on that and pray. And say, God, where could our worship lead us this week? So Father, would you guide us? Would you be the one that shows us where you would like to take us? Lord, bring to mind relationships that our heart could change towards, that our actions could change towards. Lord, for some of us, there might be a call to move on endemic slavery and to step into the space to bring your justice. For some of us, it's just a space that we need to be in just now to welcome your Holy Spirit to fill us, to call us, and to remind us that Christ is the one that we work for and serve. So come and speak to us just now, Lord Jesus.
So now we're just going to worship together. We've just been talking about how God is so faithful. And essentially what he's given us here is he's given us promises. And he doesn't just keep his promise once or twice. He's always, always faithful. And so the song we're going to sing tonight is called Do It Again, because he just keeps his promises over and over and over again. So feel free to sing along. The words will be up on the screen again like they were before, or just close your eyes and listen and let the song be sung over you. But this is Do It Again.
Walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall, but you have never failed me yet. Waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's won, for you have never failed me yet. Your promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands, this is my confidence, you've never failed me yet. I know the night won't last, your word will come Jesus, you're still enough. Keep me within your love. My heart will sing your praise again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. I've seen you move. You move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way where there was no way, and I believe I'll see you do it again. I've seen you move. You move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way where there was no way, and I believe I'll see you do it again. I'll see you do it again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. You've never failed me yet. I never will forget that you never failed me yet.
Absolutely brilliant to be together. That's us for our time just now. We'd love to connect with you, so please again send us an email to office@psandgs.org.uk and let us know what your experience of this has been. It's been so helpful to hear from folks what it's been like, what's going on with you and your faith in the communities that you are part of. So office@psandgs.org.uk. Let us know what would be helpful for you for creating, this online church that we're growing and that we're learning how to do week in, week out. Are there courses? Are there groups that you'd be interested in taking part in that are going to, encourage your faith? But we'd love to hear from you in that as well. A great way to do that, again, drop us an email. Join in with us on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram. Keep in touch with what we're up to. And, let's see what happens in this online space that we're reaching out into. It's brilliant to be together. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope you have a great week.